So welcome back to our kind of podcast series on the development of Nightrun. I'm here with Josh Vaughan. My name is Matt Schell. And in this part of the conversation, I want to talk through the approach to randomness and procedural generation in the game. And also, as we alluded to in the first segment, how that kind of influenced some of the technical architecture that we needed to develop to support that. So to give a kind of a high level sort of creative overview of the use of randomness here, the game is really a kind of like a vibes-based game, right? It's thin in terms of mechanics and heavy on atmosphere. And the kind of original creative spark for it was to create something that felt almost like a kind of an interactive music video, right? Where there's a kind of an atmosphere. It's something not super demanding in terms of focus. It's not like a fighting game or an RTS where you're putting out thousands of actions per minute, right? Instead, it's something where you can kind of lean back, drive, listen to the music, look at the art, and have like a more chill type of experience. Actually, as we kind of developed further, it got a little bit more challenging and difficult, which is an interesting point that I'm kind of interested to see how the audience reacts to. But, in terms of like the intensity of focus, that was kind of the goal. And so that played into this kind of long, endless runner style format that we wanted to do. And we had this other interesting creative constraint was that we funded the production of the game through the sale of an NFT project. And we wanted to tie them into the game in a meaningful way. So we created 2,048 visual artworks which correspond to each of the seeds for the track generator in the game. So what this means is that actually the game has a finite amount of content, right? It's not kind of truly procedural and infinite with a random seed every time, although because of the combinatorics, it's a very, very large amount of content, right? And I would be really surprised if anyone actually even plays all of the 2,048 seeds, right? I haven't done the math, but that would take a long time. And there's the fact that if you go through the tunnel, it generates another sector using one of the 2048 seeds, but kind of combined with the previous seeds, so it's different, right? So there's a very, very large combinatoric space. But the thing that I wanted in this was to make it a kind of a knowable combinatoric space. So if you go to seed one, everybody is having the same experience of seed one, right? That's a shared experience. And you could kind of talk about seed one. I was on seed one and I hit that turn, 1 minute in, and I always die there, right? And people could have a shared experience of talking about this kind of world, right, that is persistent and deterministic, right? So we wanted this balance of a wide array of procedural content, but then a deterministic kind of approach to randomness. And that was something that we kind of had to figure out early on.
Yeah, the good thing in that is generally if you're directly injecting seeds into pseudo-random number generator, it's always going to spit out that kind of same next shuffle of things. And the good thing is what we were able to do, and there was a few hiccups along the way. Yeah. We created a pretty reliable kind of number generator that would spit out what we needed. One of the most important things was making sure that we could reliably regenerate these sectors the same way every time.
Yeah.
And so that meant making sure that like every time we went into a new section, every time we would generate, all of the different pieces, the road pieces, all the rest of the kind of accoutrements around it, because all of that could generate differently, that you'd get most of this stuff coming out the same.
Yeah.
And the fun thing about
all of the stuff, right?
Well, all of the stuff will generate the same until people go in and actually start altering their seeds.
Right.
Which is really cool, because that's going to actually change the feel of the tracks a little bit as people start interacting with their configurable data.
Yeah, and that's a key dimension of this, right? I'll just go back and show the. This is our test data, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. I'll just go back and show the configurator real quick. So the seed gallery, right, is where people who bought the Night Run NFTs can go through, let's say I bought number 9 here, I can go in and I can choose. So by default, there's some generated data, right, which says, okay, Cryptodes, the Designers Republic, and All Stars are in here. Let's say I'm like, I don't want All Stars. I'm going to make this blip map. I can change it, and then I can go and copy the seed string and input that in the Night Run website. And that will then propagate back into the game, and everyone will see the choices that you made. And that includes colors, the music that's playing, which you can't hear right now, and the art collections in it, right? So this is what Josh is referring to when he mentions the randomness is deterministic, but you have user input that could actually change some of this data. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important that people can kind of change the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
This is the way that they can.
And I think this was, this is a little side note to the randomness, but this was a way for us to have kind of user-generated content in a kind of a cosmetic way, right? So it wasn't actually affecting the core gameplay, but still felt meaningful and significant. Yeah. So early on, right, we had to find a way to do this. And so we settled on generating these big shuffles of random values, right? And that is basically each seed has this big long shuffle, and then we're going through and pulling those out as we need to display items. Like, for example, if we need to pick what is going to be on any given billboard, or what tile of the track generation is going to get placed next, right? So we can see here we've got a couple of billboards from the Aurea collection, and then some terraforms by Math Castles, and those all need to, here we have some idea becomes a machine, and they need to pick what piece from what collection, and also which piece within that, right? Like Idea Machine has 500, Aurea has also 500, right? So we have to pick what's going to be shown.
Yeah, and also, like I said, until people make some decisions about stuff differently, everybody gets the same experience of these. You go to seed 512, or you go to seed 52, everybody's going to see the same track.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's great is there's actually a shuffle of seeds in each sector. So theoretically, if you had some unbelievable skills and endurance, you could get all the way to the end.
Yeah. And how many is it?
2048.
2048 sectors, right? So each sector takes probably
a minute or two.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're talking about playing and pausing.
4,096 minutes, however long that is. But I do think, from a creative perspective, this was kind of important to me that we create something that's really big, but finite and knowable, right? I think this is kind of a little bit different from the roguelike genre approach, or a lot of procedural heavy games, right? Where you're generating, it's very ephemeral, right? The generated data is kind of refreshed again and again for every run. And in this case, I wanted to use the procedural technique. It's maybe a little more similar to something like Minecraft, right? Where
it's also a bit like No Man's Sky, where people are trading out like coordinate data, and what gets generated is actually something that people can go visit if they know where they're at in the universe.
And talk meaningfully about, which I think is cool. And that's I think maybe like I don't know if it's underutilized, but it's a cool dimension of procedural content generation to generate something that is basically static data, right? It's not like every time it's being generated new. It's almost using procedural generation as a way to compress game data, right? We have this like large, thousands and thousands of permutations, and we're compressing it down into this set of seeds and then allowing it to be repeated.
And the great thing about this is just procedural generation is just a great way to take stuff, and you never know exactly how it's going to come together. Yeah. And there's a wonderful way that it can actually just express a lot of stuff, and you can get some real, if we had tried to do all of this stuff in a really, singularly focused way and make this a singular experience, and there's just a canonical run through it.
Yeah.
It gets really, really dry. And with this, that, using the building blocks, letting randomness be the guiding criteria of how it assembles it, we can kind of design some meaningful pieces and then kind of watch the beauty of how this works to assemble it. And then sometimes you get some really, really wonderful happy accidents, things that you just wouldn't have known were good combinations within that data set until you saw it just kind of spit out. And I love that, just potential for surprise and beauty within that.
Totally. And I think that, there's also just from a production, development, small team kind of dimension, right? This is a way that we can kind of punch above our weight by designing a system that generates this large amount of content and try to make something that is replayable and has some depth, even though the game is relatively mechanically shallow, right? Because it's really just driving, and with these score mechanics, which we'll talk about a little bit more, there is this large volume of procedural content to experience.
Yeah, lots of ways to experience what is in the game, and lots of ways to just kind of like find your happy place within the data. And the nice thing is it wasn't us just trying to figure out what's the best combination of things. And it also surrenders some of the agency of how this is put together to everybody else in the community, which I think is a very important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So if you have a question about the approach to procedural generation, drop that in the comments down below. I'll actually link to the tutorial that I made years ago about the way that the track generation was achieved. I actually made a separate tutorial about that goes step by step, so I can link that. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about the approach to assets because the game had a lot of them. Thanks.